Now, a Commitment 2016 special, presented by WMUR and the New Hampshire Union Leader, and in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates.
In the 2nd Congressional District, the candidates have one common goal: to change the way Washington does business.
I've always said that Congress is broken. That's why I ran.
Biggest thing is my experience. I'm the only veteran in this race.
But like any race, there's a difference of opinion as to who's best for the job.
The Republicans were all about frightening everybody.
She's been sitting down on the job.
And tonight, each will make a final case as to why he or she is the right choice for New Hampshire.
My focus is squarely on the voters of CD2 in New Hampshire and making sure that I touch each and every voter.
This is a job interview every 2 years, and I'm really proud of the record that we've put together.
Tonight, the candidates for the 2nd Congressional District.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live WMUR Granite State Debate Series from the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. I'm Political Director Josh McKelvin, and tonight we will be discussing the top issues facing the Granite State and the nation with the candidates for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District. Republican former State Representative Jim Lawrence and Democratic incumbent Congresswoman Annie Kuster. Let's have a quick look at the format tonight. The rules of the road. Questions will come from the moderator and our panelists. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Rebuttals will be at the moderator's discretion, and each candidate will also have time at the end of this for a closing statement. Before we start with the questions, let's get to know our panelists for tonight. Dan Tuohy is a reporter for the New Hampshire Union Leader. Adam Sexton is a political reporter for WMUR. And Casey McDermott is a reporter with New Hampshire Public Radio. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the first question. And it's directed to you, Congresswoman Kuster. You've been in Congress now for 2 terms, and I'm sure you're aware that Congress's popularity is pretty low when it comes to American voters. They feel it's been ineffective so far. Perhaps over the last 2 terms, the most ineffective Congress this country has seen. So how do you make the case to Granite Staters that you are an effective representative?
Well, we've had, by the way, thank you. It's great to be with you, Jim. Great to be with you again, and thanks for hosting us. We have had gridlock in the last several years. Speaker Boehner and then Speaker Ryan have had a lot of trouble with their caucus. The far right wing, the Tea Party part of that caucus, won't let bills come to the floor, including the immigration bill that's bipartisan, supported by both Senator Ayotte and Senator Shaheen. But what I've tried to do is bring people together across the aisle. The biggest showcase piece of that has been the work that I did founding the bipartisan task force on the heroin epidemic, and I'm sure we'll get into the details, but I've worked well across the aisle on veterans, on the Agriculture Committee, and for New Hampshire bringing federal funding for a number of important projects.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Lawrence, on the campaign trail, you've talked a lot about your experience in business, although the public record, there's not a whole lot of evidence for what you have done. So if you could, please describe a project or a contract that you've worked on in the last year that might better qualify you with that business background as a member of Congress.
Thanks for having me today. Thank you for this opportunity to express my positions to the voters. Yes, that's an excellent question. You know, recently I put a testimonial video up on my website, and it's of a former customer that I had that I actually worked on a classified surveillance program that was dedicated to getting warfighters in the Middle East the tools that they needed to fight and win. And he happens to be a New Hampshire voter. And one of the things I'm most proud of is not only does he talk about the good job that I did for him and the organization and the United States military to get our warfighters the equipment that they need, he talks about that he's using that as the basis to support me for my candidacy for Congress. And I'm very proud of that record, and I might add that my business did save the taxpayers millions of dollars, generated millions of dollars of revenue, and created good-paying jobs in New Hampshire with full benefits.
Mr. Lawrence, you are applying for a job in which you'll have considerable influence over taxpayer dollars, so I have to ask you this question. According to records, public records, you are behind on property taxes. What should voters take from that, given that so much of your message is about fiscal responsibility?
Well, I think the voters should take from that a very important message, just like they did 2 years ago when Representative Kuster was found to be 5 years in arrears of her property taxes and over $40,000. These personal discussions about candidates' backgrounds are mere distractions from the real issues that the voters should be concerned about. Yes, sometimes we fall behind in our bills, but I do always pay my taxes, and I will continue to pay my taxes in the future.
Congresswoman Custer.
I just want to say it was 4 years ago and a much smaller amount of money, but I will say our taxes are paid in full. And I think what the voters want to talk about are the issues, but these are issues of character. And as to the business, I think if you have that great business experience, we ought to see the records and be able to take that into consideration. Certainly the work that I did for 25 years as working with New Hampshire legislators and as a adoption attorney was part of my interview with the voters to become a member of Congress. And I'm proud of my record and proud to be here tonight to talk about the work that I've been doing on their behalf in Washington.
All right, let's move forward. Go to our panelists now. What are the questions? First one coming from Adam Sexton.
Thanks, Josh. Congresswoman Custer, earlier this year, your information was compromised in a hack of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Do you believe that a particular group or country was responsible for or behind this hack? And should the government be doing more to protect members of Congress online?
Well, I definitely think that's true. Yes, the FBI has said that it was a hack by the Russian government in an attempt to interfere with our elections. It's a very serious state of affairs, and my understanding is the FBI is continuing the investigation. It brings up the question about Mr. Comey's influence in this election right at the final hour about Secretary Clinton. I think he made a big mistake. There are two premises that are very basic in the FBI and the Department of Justice, not to comment on an investigation during that investigation, and certainly not to comment before an election. But now that that has been compromised, I think they should come forward with the investigation about the Russian connection to Mr. Trump's campaign, his staffers that were literally on the payroll, and this is something that needs to come out. But yes, absolutely very serious about the allegations of interfering in our elections.
And Mr. Lawrence, if the U.S. were to receive definitive information that a foreign nation was behind a cyber attack or hack of U.S. resources or the government, would you be in favor of using conventional military means to respond, that is traditional warfare, or would the appropriate response be in cyberspace?
I do believe that using conventional military force in any case should be a measure of the last resort. Being a military veteran and a proud graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, I know that we should not use our military in any situation around the world. This particular situation, I would not be in favor of that. We could utilize our current assets through a cyber-type response to this type of attack that would be much more appropriate than sending in military forces.
And Mr. Lawrence, do you believe, as Congresswoman Custer said, that Russia is behind hacks in this election, that they're trying to influence the election in some way?
I don't have any evidence to show either way whether Russia is trying to influence our election one way or another. So I would have to see the facts in that case and the evidence before I could make a decision on that. As far as I can tell, we have a fair election and the process should move forward.
Thank you, candidates. Next question coming from Casey McDermott of New Hampshire Public Radio, going for Mr. Lawrence.
Let's continue talking about the cyber world. Should the federal government step up its support for broadband in areas like New Hampshire's North Country and the western part of the state? And how would you reassure voters in those areas who are concerned about falling behind either economically or otherwise because of that lack of connectivity? And Mr. Lawrence, we'll go to you first.
You know, I've run a good campaign touting my business experience that I'm very proud of, and I think that puts me in a unique position to be able to help New Hampshire move its economy forward. And I've been able to visit businesses across the 2nd Congressional District, and I could tell you, I am a big believer of supporting the infrastructure that business needs. The business community in New Hampshire needs not only infrastructure investments, they also need cheap and readily available energy. So I would support both of those initiatives, particularly for economically depressed areas like the North Country. I think it's vital for us to get those companies moving forward.
Congresswoman, same question to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it's absolutely critical, and it's not just the North Country, by the way. Peterborough, I had a roundtable with realtors in Peterborough, parts of Cheshire County. So what I've tried to do is work with these communities to get the federal funding. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development Program has been excellent, and we're making great progress up in Coos County on connectivity. But it's a critical issue for New Hampshire, and one that I'll continue to work on to make sure that families and businesses have access to broadband communication.
All right, next question coming from our panelist, from Dan Toohey, the union leader, this time directed towards Congresswoman Custer first.
Thank you. Congresswoman, you participated in a sit-in in the Congress to protest the lack of gun control. How do you justify that, and how do you tell people to trust the legislative process when you did not trust it?
Well, I think this goes back to Josh's opening question. It's the gridlock, what I believe is, frankly, obstructionism in Congress. And this is a perfect example. Thank you for bringing it up. Voters here in New Hampshire and across the country, 85% of Granite State voters want the Congress to be responsible to keep our communities safe. Week after week, month after month, I've seen my colleagues come to what we call the well, come to the floor of the House, asking for a moment of silence after these horrific mass shootings in San Bernardino, in Orlando, and obviously Newtown. And so we were not able, under the Republican administration, to get a single hearing on these common sense reforms that responsible gun owners agree with. 85% of the people want the background checks to cover all the sales. 22% of the sales, online sales, are not currently covered. And so I'm very confident that going into the upcoming session, we will have hearings and we will be able to move this forward.
What do you say to people who say that was just stunt? So many Republican colleagues called it a stunt.
I don't think it was a stunt. It was to gain attention to the gridlock and to the obstructionism of a very small group of people. I keep coming back to that 30 or 40 members of this far extreme group that are keeping the country from moving forward and the people's house, Congress, from doing the people's work.
And Mr. Lawrence, you have been a steadfast advocate in your support for the Second Amendment. But does that support ignore the vast majority of Granite Staters and Americans who were in favor of universal, more comprehensive background checks?
You know, no, I don't think it does, because what I've campaigned on is I want to be an effective legislator. And unfortunately, the types of proposals that I'm hearing coming from my opponent, I do not believe will keep Americans safe. Vermont is consistently ranked as the safest state in the nation. It is at this point as well. And they certainly don't model their gun laws after this type of gun control. And I might add that the sit-in that you referred to previously came after the horrific Orlando shooting. It was a great tragedy. But the reality is that none of these provisions that we're now proposing would have prevented that act from happening. However, what would have prevented it is making sure that law enforcement had the resources that it needed to follow the leads, conclude its investigations, and also enforce the laws that are on the book. This was an individual that we interviewed him, we knew he had ties to terrorists, and we couldn't get the job done. The existing laws would have prevented this from happening if law enforcement had the proper resources.
Take 30 seconds, Congressman.
Sure, that's precisely what we're talking about, is if you are on a terrorist watch list, you should not be able to buy a gun that caused mass destruction of life in Orlando. And I think there's broad agreement. The American people feel that way, but we can't get a single hearing in the United States Congress. And so that's what I'm talking about. The people's voice needs to be heard. And I'm telling you, wherever I go, responsible gun owners, of course I believe in the Second Amendment. The 2nd District of New Hampshire is a strong gun-owning area and region and always will be. But they want their children to be safe going to kindergarten, going to the mall, going to the theater.
We got to move forward. Next question coming from Adam Sexton for Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence, you've said that you want to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act with a system that allows for lower cost and more portability for consumers. But without specifics, what do you say to people who might lose their health insurance under that move? And would a repeal come before replacement is in place?
Actually, I'm going to correct that statement a little bit. I haven't said I wanted to repeal and replace. What I said is I wanted to repeal the portions of this law that don't make sense and replace them with things that would do a better job of servicing the American people. And some clear examples of that I think we need to pursue is that the idea of allowing people to cross state lines to procure their health insurance is a good idea that's long overdue. This will broaden the market, expand competition, and help drive costs down. I also think we need to make sure that we never allow the Cadillac tax to go into law. That particular provision of this law would have a disastrous impact not only on our economy, but also on our healthcare system.
And Representative Custer, for years now, hospitals in the 2nd District and across New Hampshire have struggled to recruit and hire enough nurses. With more people accessing health care through the Affordable Care Act, this problem may only get worse. What changes would you make to the ACA to ensure that the emphasis on primary care that is in the law is actually being implemented in the real world?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say, just in response to the previous question, 100,000 people in New Hampshire now have coverage who didn't have coverage. So when we're worried about the heroin epidemic, when we're worried about our communities, it's incredibly important. I have supported some of the changes, repeal of the Cadillac tax, for example. I don't agree with the cross state lines because I think you end up going to the lowest common denominator. But getting to your question, what we need to do is bring people in and help to raise the skill level of our workforce. We have an incredibly low unemployment, which is terrific, 2.9%. I'm very focused on bringing people into our healthcare delivery system and making sure that they have the skills. I was involved with the creation of a brand new community college in Lebanon, New Hampshire that will start to train more nurses and more people in healthcare professions. These are great jobs and we should be looking forward to it. So I'll continue to work on that, getting the funding to create new programs and really lift people's skills.
Thank you, Canada. Let's just move on now. NHPR's Casey McDermott. First question going to Congresswoman Custer.
Nationwide, baby boomers are leaving the workforce at a rate of more than 10,000 a day. And it's estimated that almost half of them have saved nothing for retirement, meaning that they will rely heavily on Social Security. In addition, the Urban Institute says that baby boomers are retiring with more personal debt than any previous generation. Should younger generations pay increased taxes to support them, or should boomers be forced to accept austerity in the form of more limited benefits? And Congresswoman Custer, to you first.
Sure. So you're setting up an either or, and I think there's a third option that's better for everyone. So no, I do not believe that the burden should fall on young people. I also disagree, and I'll let my opponent speak for himself. He's talked about all options on the table. I would not raise the age. Congress has already raised the age for Social Security from 65 to 67. If you work on your feet, as many teachers and people in trades do, that they're plenty ready to retire and they've paid in. What I would do is raise the cap on the withholding from wages. So it's now $118,500. Everyone making up to that level has money taken out of every paycheck for their Social Security. But above that level, they don't continue to have money taken out. So it's a fairness issue, but also the silver lining is that if we raise that cap, we can make Social Security sustainable for the long term.
Mr. Lawrence, same question for you. You said you would fence off the funding in Social Security. How does that keep it solvent?
A lot of the reasons why we have the issue with Social Security that we do now is because Congress spent that money on other things. Before we make Social Security solvent, the first priority should be to fence off the payroll taxes that we collect for Social Security and not allow Congress to spend it on anything else. And then we can start looking at what other issues we can, what other tools we can use to make Social Security solvent. I do disagree with my opponent on this issue that we shouldn't just look at one particular item. Unfortunately, Congress has talked about this for many, many years, but they have failed to do anything about it. And I would also add that, you know, it's nice to sit up here on the debate stage and say that we're going to solve all these problems, but no offense, but my opponent has been in Congress for 4 years, and she's failed to introduce one piece of legislation to address this critical issue to the citizens of this state. It's time to start acting and not just giving lip service to solving some of these issues.
You have the right to respond.
Sure. No, I have co-sponsored legislation, and this is something that I work on and will continue to work on. It's, again, back to the Republican Tea Party that's blocking progress on this issue.
I don't think we can block or blame the other party for everything that goes wrong and what we fail to do. We need to be held accountable for what we do and what we don't do. And unfortunately, I think my opponent has failed to act in this case, in other cases, to solve the issues of the citizens of New Hampshire.
You can respond if you want, then we got to move forward.
Well, I want him to understand that it's the Speaker of the House that schedules the hearings and brings bills to the floor, and he's chosen not to act on this, but I continue to support bipartisan legislation and will continue to work on it.
All right, back to our panelists. Dan Tuohy, the union leader. Question for Mr. Lawrence.
Moving to climate change. The Paris Climate Accord went into effect today. It's the agreement that some 200 countries have pledged to limit the increase in global warming by up to 2 degrees Celsius. But there's nothing in it to ensure that it happens, and all the countries involved haven't ratified it. Do you think the U.S. should come up with a legislative framework to reduce carbon emissions? And if so, how would you do that? And if not, why not?
You know, the environment is definitely something that we absolutely must protect. We have to protect our environment. But unfortunately, our Environmental Protection Agency has regulations that are outdated, that haven't been updated. They don't protect our environment well, but what they do is penalize our industry, and our economy suffers. We must maintain an environment where we not only protect our environment, but we protect our ability to compete in a global economy. Yes, I do think that we already have laws on the books to curtail emissions to save our environment and protect our environment. But we absolutely positively have to update these regulations, some of them going back to the 70s, so that they make sense and they protect us and they protect our ability to compete in a global economy. I mean, we could look at Flint, Michigan. We can look at Washington, D.C. with the contamination of our water supply. We could look right here in New Hampshire with the PFOA contaminations of our water supply. The Environmental Protection Agency has not been protecting our environment, and they've been damaging our economy.
Congresswoman, framework?
The answer, back to the question about the global warming, the answer is yes, definitively. And I think what we should do is use the model that we have here in New England that's worked very, very well, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And what we can do is create jobs in renewable energy that will reduce carbon emissions and improve the economy. Right here in New Hampshire, there are many, many cases. I'm the co-chair of the Bioenergy Caucus that's created wonderful jobs in the forest industry and trucking and bioenergy fuels. But what we need to do, we're wasting too much money on the subsidization of fossil fuels, of coal and oil. That's costing taxpayers millions, if not billions of dollars. And we should be investing in renewable energy, reduce the emissions, grow the economy, and it's a win-win, and we'll save the planet.
Would you like to respond?
Yes. You know, a lot of the renewable energy initiatives and contracts we've signed is the reason why we have some of the highest electric rates in the country right now. And if you talk to any manufacturing firm in this state, which I've spoken to many of them, they are actually expanding their capacity. They're building plants in other states because we can't give them cheap energy here in New Hampshire. Those thousands of jobs that we're shipping to other states will swamp and clearly outnumber the amount of jobs that we can create through any renewable program. We need to protect our environment, but we also need to protect our economy, and we need to start creating new, good-paying jobs for the citizens of New Hampshire. I have young kids. I'd like for them to have jobs to come and work in New Hampshire instead of leaving the state.
If you'd like to take 30 more seconds on this issue, then we'll move forward.
Well, we certainly agree on that, on creating jobs, and I've visited dozens and dozens of companies in my Congress at Your Company program. I talk to them all the time about energy and energy costs, and many of them are instituting renewable energy projects at their plants to bring down their energy costs. The town of Peterborough has a fantastic new program, 7 acres of solar panels that not only are going to provide energy for the town buildings, but now for the schools. So these are great projects, and I think they're going to grow the economy here in New Hampshire. I'm very excited about it.
All right, let's change the pace a little bit with sort of a lightning round. You guys know the drill on this. You know, yes or no or short answers. We appreciate that. Just this week, a New York hedge fund apparently bought two ski areas in your district, Loon and Mount Sunapee. Congresswoman, is this a good deal or a bad deal for local skiers?
Well, we've just heard about it. I want to investigate it, but it's always a good thing to invest in ski areas right here in New Hampshire. It's great for our economy. Our families enjoy it. I grew up in the ski industry, and I want to do anything that I can to, again, create jobs and grow tourism and certainly skiing here in New Hampshire.
What's your take on this, Mr. Lawrence?
Well, I'm actually a former ski instructor, so this is something near and dear to my heart. But, you know, I'd have to see.
In common.
Well, at least we have that in common. I'd have to see the details of the plan. I mean, whenever an outside entity purchases a resource within the state, I would be a little concerned or skeptical that we might get some undue influence that might damage the ability to service our community. But I'd have to see the details of the plan first.
Maybe a bipartisan skiing trip would be just
Oh, that'd be
everything
awesome.
that works, right?
I'll
Be in favor
race
of
you.
that.
Okay. 57% of, according to Pew Research, Mr. Lawrence, 57% of American public believes that it's time to legalize recreational marijuana. Do you agree with the majority?
You know, this state, I believe, has taken prudent steps to regulate marijuana. I believe that it is a state issue. I would support the state's right to regulate marijuana as it saw fit. That's why if I was elected to Congress, I would be in favor of making the federal law consistent and removing the ban at the federal level so that states could regulate it. But I wouldn't second guess the state's wisdom in this particular issue.
All right.
I think we agree again. I think we're going to learn a lot here in New Hampshire with our experience on the medical marijuana. We'll learn a lot on Election Day from Massachusetts and Maine about their initiatives on marijuana. I've been hearing mixed reports because I'm very involved in the heroin epidemic. There are some people who think it could be a good thing for people with high anxiety. Other people who I've met in recovery who started down the path to drug addiction with marijuana in their young teens. So I think the jury's still out, but I wouldn't disagree with this approach.
So you both defer to the state saying it's their decision, but do you think that it's time to legalize recreational marijuana? And starting with you, Congressman.
I would listen to my constituents. I think it would be a statewide referendum. And frankly, I'm in the process of learning more about it in terms of the societal impact and particularly the public health impact. I think we're going to learn a lot from Colorado, Oregon, and Washington State. But I don't want to presume to have that answer until the jury's still out, until we know.
You have a position?
I wouldn't second guess the state's wisdom on that. I mean, in Congress, it would be my job to make sure that the federal law didn't encroach on the people's will in New Hampshire, and I would stick with that.
All right. Should Congress open an investigation into, we touched on the opioid issue, obviously a major problem in this state, if not the biggest problem in this state. Should they open an investigation into pharmaceutical companies and their role in the addiction crisis? And we'll start with you, Mr. Lawrence.
Well, no one, I don't think anyone hasn't been touched by this tragedy. It's very unfortunate what's going on in our state, and we absolutely have to do everything in our power to fight the drug crisis that's going on currently. I do believe that we should not leave any stone unturned. That's why if I'm elected to be your congressman, I would support and work with state and local officials everywhere I could to make sure they had the support, not only to give to law enforcement, but also to make sure that we have adequate treatment facilities and to make sure that we have enough resources for education to try and protect our most vulnerable class, our youth. The
question was, do you think Congress should open an investigation into the pharmaceutical companies to see if they are marketing in a negative way, contributing to the problem?
I don't believe that's a role that Congress should take right now. I mean, I think we clearly understand what's going on here. Unlike my opponent, she might have a different opinion. From what I understand, she was a big pharma lobbyist for many years. I don't believe that that's the right way for us to go.
Congresswoman?
The answer to your question is yes, definitely. Congress should open an investigation. The attorney generals already have. Joe Foster, right in New Hampshire, is involved in this lawsuit. And already the evidence is coming in that the pharmaceutical companies that were selling the opiates were telling the healthcare providers that they were, quote unquote, not very addictive. When they made the transition from oxycodone to OxyContin, the longer lasting, this is something that our bipartisan task force to combat the heroin epidemic is already looking into. We have 85 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, working together. We passed 18 bills last June, very rare, and now we're getting the funding for education, treatment, long-term recovery, investigating about pain management and techniques for lowering the use of opiates and the pharmaceutical companies, as well as the funding for law enforcement. So
right.
Absolutely, the answer is yes.
Congresswoman, would you support an amendment, a constitutional amendment, to balance the budget?
Here's what I support is legislation with Senator Shaheen for a biennial budget, which is the process that we use here in New Hampshire. So you spend the first year creating the budget and the second year on the spending. Part of the problem in Congress is that they are in a constant cycle year after year, and right now it's broken down completely under Speaker Ryan. So I don't think we need the constitutional amendment. I think we can have a balanced budget and that we can do it in a biennial budget cycle.
Mr. Lawrence, same question.
Yes, I would support a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. We balance our budget every year here in the state of New Hampshire. It's worked very well for us. If we had a balanced budget amendment on the books already, we might not be in $20 trillion of debt right now. It's a big, serious issue. Congress has failed to address this issue to date, and I think it's time to get serious about doing that. I would also support going to a biennial budgeting process. I do believe that is a more efficient and effective way to plan and budget for the federal government.
All right, thank you. Just occurred to me that this is kind of heavy for a lightning round, but we are where we are. Would you, what federal tax loophole, Mr. Lawrence, would you close? Have you identified any?
Well, you know what? I don't think the federal tax loop, any particular federal tax loophole needs to be closed particularly. But I think we need to look at the 22,000 plus pages of tax code and close many of them. If we flatten our tax that we charge for income tax and streamline our process, make a tax code that most people can understand. I mean, the average CPA can't even understand everything that's in the tax code. We would go a long way to actually improving compliance. We'd collect more taxes. We'd reduce the burden of Americans, and we'd be able to move our economy quicker at a faster pace. You know, one of the biggest problems we have right now is that our economy is growing at the slowest rate in the history of the country. You know, 8 years with the highest GDP growth rate of 3%. We have to make a change.
Well, not only was it a heavy lightning round, but we also kind of blew the concept of lightning round.
Can I get
right out
that
of the
one
gate.
if I'm short?
Of course. I was leading to that. Take your time to same question.
Thank you, Josh. So the number one tax loophole that I would close is the one that encourages U.S. companies to ship jobs overseas. New Hampshire's been hit very hard by this. It's something that's come up in previous campaigns as well. What I want to do is bring those dollars back to the United States and invest them here locally to grow our economy and create jobs here at home. So I have a Make It in America agenda, but one of the key components is you close the loophole that encourages companies to ship jobs overseas, and instead you change the law to bring those funds back, repatriate the earnings, and put it into an infrastructure bank that will grow our economy, grow infrastructure, and grow jobs right here at home.
All right, one more quick one, and then we'll move on. Just to get you on record, astronaut Mark Kelly was in New Hampshire recently. He told News 9 that he expects a manned mission to Mars by the year 2020. Do you think that's realistic, Mr. Lawrence, and would you support funding for it?
You know, I think the timeline's a little short for that, to be honest with you. I do have some experience in engineering with space systems. It was one of the first jobs that I had after graduating from the Air Force Academy. These missions take a lot of time to plan, and it takes a lot of resources. So I'd have to look at the details, but I don't think we can get to that mark by 2020.
Would you support funding?
You know, if there was a right rate of return on the program, I could see doing that, but I'd have to see the details.
Congresswoman?
I think Mark Kelly is terrific. I'm glad he's been here, and I trust his judgment, having worked at NASA, that that's a viable plan. I would support the project and the funding, because I think the technology that comes from space travel that we can use throughout our economy is critically important to growing the jobs of the 21st century. So
All right.
yes.
Good stuff. All right. Next question coming from social media on Facebook, and it is from Valerie Drown. She's asking, given the current crisis in the New Hampshire dairy industry, what can be done to help protect the future of these farms so that the next generation can take over the farming? Congresswoman?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Valerie, and it's very pertinent. I serve on the Agriculture Committee, and we had a roundtable of all the dairy farmers who came to Claremont just a couple of months ago. Actually, today in my office, I was drafting a letter to the committee about changes in what's called the Margin Protection Program. I won't get too far into the weeds, but basically there are a number of steps that Congress can take to help our dairy farmers. The primary one is that New Hampshire, New England is at the end of the proverbial end of the road here in terms of high costs of feed, high costs for shipping, and given the weather that we had and the drought this summer, we lost 19 dairy farms, and we only started with 120 this year. So it's been very, very tough for us. I'm working with the farmers. I'm working with both sides of the aisle on this issue, and it's one that I think we can resolve. The good news is, in the very short term, I think the state is going to give them some relief on a special program they have, and then we'll get this fixed for the long term.
What about you, Mr. Lawrence? The farms are closing the doors at an accelerated rate. What can be done to revive the industry?
Well, this is a very critical area. It's actually something that's near and dear to my heart. Something that most people don't know is one of my first jobs as a teenager was working in Marlborough, New Hampshire, helping with livestock, and there was a dairy farmer out there by the name of Mr. Kenny that I have very fond memories of helping him out on his dairy farm. And unfortunately, he's had to convert his dairy farm to now a maple farm. He makes maple syrup because he couldn't keep up. We have taken some steps to try and protect the dairy industry in this state, but there is definitely more that we can do. I think it is important for us to do that. I would be willing to work with state and local officials to make sure that the dairy farmers have the support that they need to ride out hard times, hard economic times, which they're suffering under right now, to make sure that we maintain this important part of our industrial base.
Now let's get our panel back in here now. Next question coming from New Hampshire Public Radio's Casey McDermott.
What is one specific concrete action that the federal government can take to help improve the economy in New Hampshire's North Country? And Congresswoman Custer, we'll go to you first.
Sure. So lots of different things, but let me just start with this program that I mentioned, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development. I've been a part of bringing that to the North Country. It can be used not just for not-for-profit investments. So just to give you an example, Bristol, New Hampshire, not quite all the way up north, but opening a brand new health clinic. We did open a new health clinic for veterans in Littleton, New Hampshire, and I'm working on that issue in Colebrook and Berlin as well. But also for-profit companies. So I'm working with a couple of different companies and just had a visit to the Groveton Mill this week. And basically that's a terrific project. We have turned around the Groveton Mill. You remember the paper mill that closed there. And we were talking about a Vermont company that's coming in. Bob Chapman is the owner that bought the project, cleaned it all up, and this Vermont company is going to start in the next couple of months with 60 new jobs, probably moving up from there. So I'm very engaged in creating jobs, and also roads and bridges and highways is a big part of that. And the TIFIA funds that I brought to the North Country for repairing and replacing 24 red-listed bridges and putting in lots of new pavement is going to make a difference for that community as well.
Mr. Lawrence, same question to you.
You know, I've had the opportunity to visit many firms throughout the 2nd Congressional District, firms like Whalen Engineering in Charlestown, firms like Ruger. And, you know, the one thing that every one of these businesses has told me is that there's two issues that they face that they can't get around. It's our high energy costs, followed by over-regulation from our government. And I'm happy to hear that we're going to have 60 new jobs in Groveton. But I've had accounts and I've seen evidence that we've actually shipped thousands of jobs over the past several years because these companies are investing in building companies in other states because they can't afford to do business here in New Hampshire. So the North Country is no different. The number one thing that we can do is get rid of government regulation. And unfortunately, my opponent doesn't seem to have a voting record that supports that, because she recently voted against the Regulatory Relief for Small Business Act, which was an act that was designed to target the type of regulation coming from Washington, D.C., that prevents our businesses from being able to invest in New Hampshire and grow.
Please respond, ma'am.
Well, I think what we need to do is grow jobs in the North Country and work with these companies. If there are overburdensome regulations, I'm happy to work on that. I haven't seen that problem in my visits to the companies, because what they're really dealing with is the fact that the jobs were shipped overseas, the paper industry closing down, a dozen paper mills. We've got one left in Gorham. But we've been able to bring bioenergy jobs to Berlin and Gorham, and I'm really excited about the plant that opened there and what bioenergy can do, what forest timber industry can do generally for jobs in the North Country is going to revitalize that part of the state. And also the tourism, I do a lot of work. I even have worked on bioenergy with the Cog Railway. So the ski areas, all of the different types of industry up there, working on manufacturing, bringing that back, working on retail, and working on growing the economy so that we can improve the quality of life. It's a beautiful place and one of my favorite parts of the
Congresswoman,
state.
appreciate that. Obviously, you're both aware that your 2nd District would be home to a rather controversial project. Adam Sexton, let's get back to the panel, has a question on that.
Mr. Lawrence, you just mentioned the high cost of energy in New Hampshire. Let's discuss the proposed Northern Pass project, which would bring hydropower from Canada into and through New Hampshire. Mr. Lawrence, you've called it a bad deal, but with the high cost of energy, as you mentioned, shouldn't everything be on the table?
Well, I would disagree with you, Adam, that we shouldn't keep everything on the table, but it is a bad deal as the plan is laid out right now. I'm very happy to see that they've actually agreed to bury some of those lines now, which is a step in the right direction. But let's face facts. We just heard my opponent talk about tourism and how heavily the North Country relies on that for their economy. We're talking about a project that's slated to plow through our state that will damage our beautiful landscape, will damage our tourism industry, but there are no guarantees on the table that we will actually get any of the power or the benefit from that project as it stands now. I'm just looking, and I've always said this, if I'm elected to Congress, I'm going to fight for the people of New Hampshire first. If I see a deal that doesn't give the people of New Hampshire their just due, like allowing a project to go through our state without guarantees to help us where we need the help the most, lowering our energy costs, I'm not going to back it.
Congresswoman Custer, is Mr. Lawrence right? Is the Northern Pass project a bad deal for New Hampshire?
Well, I don't think we can say definitively at this point. And I got very engaged, as did our entire bipartisan delegation, in this process, working with the company and working with the communities. People were concerned about the impact on tourism and obviously the visual impact of the high power lines coming through. And the company did make an agreement to bury over 60 miles of that project. Now we're working our way down, and we have a discussion going on about where the project's going to be and the siting further south. But look, we do need to talk about energy and the high cost of energy here in New Hampshire. And I think my opponent has just taken this right off the table without a thorough investigation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the site evaluation committee here in the state that is going to make this decision. But what I've said to the company is work with these communities, because maybe there is a way to get to a place that will be acceptable. If more can be buried, I don't think we should out of hand just write it off. Now, on the Kinder Morgan project, I did look into it very closely. It crossed 17 towns in my district. And in that project, trying to work with the company, they were not forthcoming.
Congresswoman.
I reached the conclusion that it should not happen, and they pulled the plug on that project.
And I'm going to allow you to respond in a moment, Mr. Lawrence, but I do want to ask you, you haven't yet taken a firm position on the Northern Pass project. Are you leaning in one direction or?
My role, I'm not the decider. My role is to bring people to the table, to listen to the communities. That's what I've done extensively. We've attended all of the hearings. We talk frequently with the community, and ultimately trying to work with the company to get a project that is more beneficial to the people of the 2nd District. If that can't happen, then I would come out in opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Lawrence?
You know, based on all of my business experience, I'm not going to take anything off the table. What I'm saying is that I don't see enough benefit for the people of New Hampshire in this project yet. I want to guarantee that New Hampshire gets their just due, and I think that it's incumbent upon any of our elected officials to make sure that we support the people of New Hampshire first.
Thank you, candidates. Next question coming from the panel, Dan Toohey, Union Leader.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about the top of the ticket here. Mr. Lawrence, if Hillary Clinton wins on Tuesday and a President Clinton comes to the Hill with a VA reform bill that includes funding for a full-service VA hospital in New Hampshire, will you work with her and will you stand by her as she signs it into law?
Absolutely. As a veteran myself, I am very well aware of the plight of many of our veterans that can't get the health care that we promised them. Matter of fact, I'm incensed that veterans were literally dying in line waiting for the health care that they deserve. I could tell you one thing. Not only will I support President Hillary Clinton if she's elected to do the things that we need to do to give our veterans the health benefits that they deserve, you know what I'll do? I'll never vote against a bill like the Veterans Accountability Act, which my opponent unfortunately voted against right in the midst of this crisis where veterans were not getting the health care and the VA was not being held accountable.
Congresswoman, you have an opportunity to respond if you'd like.
Sure, it's not true. You could just check my record on the floor of the House. I
Yeah,
voted for that bill. I voted for that bill
voted against
on the
it in
floor of the
committee.
House. In committee, we were trying to get further amendment, and I voted for it on the floor, and that's simply the process that we follow. I am on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I absolutely would support President Clinton bringing that bill to our committee and to the Congress. I have devoted the past 4 years to working with veterans. My father flew in World War II and was a POW. They have served us, and now it is our time to serve them. I've brought health care to the North Country with the new clinic in Littleton, and I will continue to fight for veterans, working on homeless projects in Plymouth and in Nashua, and creating jobs and holding job fairs for veterans.
All right, back to Dan Toohey.
A similar question, Congresswoman. Donald Trump wins on Tuesday. President Trump comes to the Hill with a bill for paid family leave. Will you work with him, and will you stand with him and sign it, or as he signs it?
Absolutely. Paid family leave is near and dear to my heart. This is an issue that is very personal for me. I have 8 nieces. 5 of them have had babies in the last year and a half, and several of them had 0 days of paid family leave, which meant that they had to take a newborn infant and go back to work, either take a few days of vacation if they had it, maybe take a pay period or 2 that they could stay home without being paid. But the time has come. We are the only industrialized country in the world that does not have paid family leave. We need to increase the minimum wage, and we need pay equity for women to make sure that women are paid the same as men. This is a family issue for women and men all across the state of New Hampshire. When they come home to their paychecks at the end of the week, let's not leave 21 cents on the dollar on the table.
Stick with our panel. Next question coming from Casey.
Congresswoman Kuster, you've advocated for more support for survivors of sexual assault, and you recently spoke out about your own experiences, which included an incident that took place while you were a college student at Dartmouth. What changes would you make to the way that colleges specifically handle, prevent, adjudicate cases of sexual assault?
Well, thank you, Casey. I do have legislation on that, and I've been going around to all of the college campuses in my district. We have about a dozen college campuses, and it's a tremendous opportunity. Let me just take a second to give a shout out to Keene State College and a wonderful program that they've started there. I had the opportunity to go in the early days of the students coming back in September to see a play that they do called No Zebras. Viewers will have to look that up online because I won't have have a chance to explain it, but it's about bystander intervention for sexual assault, sexual harassment, and lots of other issues, discrimination, for example. My legislation will work with the colleges for making sure that we have an adjudicative process, that perpetrators do face consequences, and that survivors have the resources that they need to recover. But most importantly, I want to work on prevention, and that's where we need to be.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Casey?
Mr. Lawrence, in the last year alone, the Pentagon has received 6,000 reports of sexual assault involving service members, but experts have cautioned that the actual numbers could be much higher because many incidents go unreported. You've spoken tonight about your experience in the military. What changes would you make to the way that those cases are handled?
Well, that's an excellent question. Being a veteran myself, I could tell you, and also being a parent of 4 daughters and husband of a wife, this is definitely a serious issue that we need to take seriously. If someone brings forward allegations, whether it's in the military or any other organization in the country, we need to make sure that the provisions are in place, not only to identify these incidents, investigate them quickly, and make sure that we protect the victims or the potential victims of these horrific crimes. The Pentagon is a difficult situation because of the nature and the history of the military. They haven't been integrated as long as the rest of society. They definitely could do more than they've done to make sure that we're protecting everyone that serves, all the brave men and women that serve in the armed forces.
Back to the panel. Adam Sexton, first question for Mr. Lawrence.
Well, extending commuter rail into southern New Hampshire remains a controversial issue on the state level. The prospects are better for the northern New England rail corridor, which would put a high-speed rail link from Boston to Montreal and could be a big economic benefit for the lone New Hampshire stop on that line in Claremont. With limited federal funds for these projects, which one would you prioritize if elected? Boston to Montreal or Boston to Concord?
That's an excellent question. The one thing I could tell you about all rail projects, having been the benefit of serving this country in the Air Force and living in many different places, I've seen rail projects, some of them run well and some of them not so well. But the one thing they all have in common is they require tax dollars to subsidize them in order to continue. So before I say which one I would support, what I would say first is in order for me to support any rail project, I would want an honest and open dialogue with the voters so that they understand that they're actually going to have a tax bill. They're going to foot the bill to subsidize this particular type of transportation. And if they're okay with that and they understand that there's going to be a tax from now until in perpetuity to keep that rail project going, then I would support it. But it's only after we have that dialogue. So I would defer that to the people of the North Country and the people in the southern tier of the state.
Congresswoman Custer, Northern New England corridor or Capital Corridor, if you had to choose one?
Sure. Well, I've been a very big proponent of the Capital Corridor coming up from Lowell, Lawrence, up to Nashua, hopefully to Manchester. The studies are in, and the definitive proof is that this will expand the economy, create jobs, grow our economy, and actually, if you look at Executive Counselor Pappas and Van Ostern have a proposal that will not require extensive tax incentives along the way, and in fact will really benefit our state. So that's priority number one. In terms of the Montreal line, we are working with the folks in Claremont. I have legislation called pre-clearance, and what that's about, it's bipartisan legislation in the House and Senate, and it's for trade and for rail traffic of goods and services going across the border with Canada so that we don't get held up there. The people in Claremont are very excited about it. I'm also working with them on the Claremont stop.
We're running out of time. We're down to our final question before we get to the closing statements. It might be one of the more important questions that we ask tonight. Congressman, what would you say to a young person who's going to be voting in this election for the first time, who entered this election cycle enthusiastic and eager to be a part of it, but may have some serious doubts with all the negativity that we've seen about the integrity of our democratic process?
Well, I would tell them how important their vote is. I can't emphasize this enough. New Hampshire is right at the center of this storm, and they've got to turn off, no offense to WMUR, great coverage, but turn off the ads, turn off the phone and all the phone calls, and focus in on this is very personal. I will say their vote counts. When I was 18 years old, it was the first time I voted, 1974. I drove home from college. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. All 5 of us drove home, and that United States Senate race was a 4-person, 4-vote margin. So that's how close these races could be. Their vote is incredibly important, and it's the people's government. Just be aware that if you don't get out to vote on Tuesday, life will go on. One or the other of these parties will win, and it will move forward, and you will be left out.
Okay, Mr. Lawrence, what do you say to a young person who might be losing faith in the system?
Well, I'll start with what I tell my children that are of voting age now. This is a very important time in our history. There are a lot of serious issues, a lot of questions about what direction this country is going to go in. And it's going to profoundly affect every young person in this country. It's absolutely vital that they show up and vote. The advice that I would give them would also say, ignore the distractions. There have been a lot of personal attacks. There have been a lot of mudslinging in this election cycle. They have no place in American politics. I've run a hard race focused on the issues, focused on what I want to do in Washington to make life better for the people of New Hampshire. I would urge young voters to cut through the fray, ignore the distractions, ignore the personal attacks, and look at the issues and vote and decide which direction America's going to go in, because their future depends on it.
All right, we are down to our closing statements now. We drew to see who would go first and have the last word. And how did that turn out? I have to.
Mr. Lawrence is first.
Mr. Lawrence is going first.
You
Thank
said
you.
that quick. You must like that.
I apologize. Having some audio issues here. Closing statements.
I'm deferring to you.
I served my constituency in the State House. I served my country in the Air Force. I was fortunate enough to graduate from the United States Air Force Academy. And now it's time for me to pay back the American people for the leadership training they provided me. New Hampshire has a long tradition of sending effective leaders to Washington who support New Hampshire. My opponent is a lifelong lobbyist turned politician who has garnered most of her support from outside of our state and from Washington, D.C. 2 days ago, Nancy Pelosi was here in the state campaigning for her. If you believe, like I do, that Washington is broken and the only way it can be fixed is by electing a new effective leader, I ask for your vote on November the 8th. I ask for you to stand with me so that I could stand up for you, the voters of New Hampshire, because we can do better.
Thank you very much for your closing statement. Congresswoman Custer.
Well, I was about to say we're the exception to the rule. We haven't had any attacks. But listen, every 2 years we have the opportunity for a job interview. I've been in Congress for 4 years, and I'm very proud of the work that I've done. I'm coming before you tonight to talk about that work and how I've served our veterans here in Congress, in the Veterans Affairs Committee, serving farmers and timber interests in the Agriculture Committee, but most importantly, serving the people of the state of New Hampshire, creating good jobs, building infrastructure with the TIFIA alone, $200 million in funding for roads and bridges and highways, building new community colleges with the whole new campus in Lebanon and programs in Nashua, helping support veterans and seniors. This is a critically important election. I ask for your support. I hope you'll get out to vote on November 8th, and I wish you and your family wonderful holidays.
Thank you very much to the candidates. That's going to wrap up our final Granite State debate. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday. It's very important, and thanks for everybody who's participating in this process. Have a great night.